What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Dash. We are a mere few days away from the start of the Pac-12 season. So, with that being said, let's jump right into our first topic. Um, just we're gonna go over Kieran and I. We're gonna go with our expectations for the 2020 season. Kieran, what are your thoughts? What are your expectations?
My expectations are tempered. I think that the Buffs, it's a rebuilding year as much as it can be in college football for the Buffs. They lost a lot of key players. They're rebuilding that whole offensive sort of side of the ball. And so my expectations are definitely tempered, which, plays into a lot of why I was a big proponent of Brendan Lewis earlier in the year for the starting quarterback position, things like that, is just because I see this season, especially not only given the fact that the Buffs are rebuilding, but the difference in the atmosphere and things like that. I just see it as, the season's unlike any other. And so it's bound to just go much differently. And I think that the Buffs could definitely use it as a way to sort of start over and sort of start fresh after losing Mel Tucker and things like that. But how about yourself?
Yeah, I had a lot of disappointment from last year's team. I really thought last year was a team that they could finally break out of that streak of going 5-7, and they had the talent. While we didn't like Steven Montez, he was still a talented quarterback. Had one heck of an arm. We had Laviska, just an absolute beast at wide receiver, in a decently strong defense. But last year we lost a lot of winnable games. Air Force, Arizona, USC, just very frustrating losses that could have changed the outlook of that season, possibly even changed the outlook Mel Tucker had leaving his job. But nonetheless, that's now a moot point. Like you said, my expectations are kind of tempered. This is the perfect season for this Colorado team to kind of start over again, just because of how young they are. And we talked about this, that this would have been the ideal time to really try to put in all of the freshman talent we have. So far, after taking a look at the depth chart, it seems like they're doing that, especially in the wide receiver and the running back position, where we have a lot of that strong freshman talent. But again, Brendan Lewis not being named the starting quarterback, not even being named QB2, but it's just not the best decision. But we'll get to that later in the show. But for me, I'd love to see Colorado in like 2 games. We covered the schedule. It's a very
Yep.
favorable schedule for Colorado. I think we have a lot of games that we can win. But for me, I'd love to see just possibly 2 wins. But it's more about the player development, just because this year is that year for Colorado to really develop their freshman players. But we'll have to see what happens. But for me, I think at minimum, 2 wins.
I think that I would say certainly at a minimum 2 wins. I think that that includes this weekend. I think that UCLA it's got to be a win for the Buffs, especially given sort of what we talked about last week with the favorability sort of the Buffs versus the versus sort of a even sort of a UCLA team that's starting even more from scratch than CU is. So I think that's super, super important. But I honestly, while my expectations are tempered, it doesn't mean that I think that I'm merely hoping for 2 wins out of our 7-game schedule. And I think that certainly within the Pac-12 South and some of the different advantages that we talked about that teams could have home and away and things like that, without, with the removal of fans, could also play into CU having some success, especially, for one, playing at altitude. It's one of the sort of things that you can't take out of sort of the equation. And so I think that of the few advantages that teams can have, I think that that's one of them. And so fortunately we have that on our side. And I think that overall, if CU can use this season to little like sort of establish themselves a little bit more in the Pac-12 South in particular, that then I think that bodes super, super well for next year, just because if they're able to sort of set a high baseline this year with all the sort of wonky stuff that's happened over the course of the season, even thus far, and the season hasn't even begun yet, officially, that I think if they're able to do that, then that sets us up really, really well for success and a longer term, more established CU outlook for the future.
Yeah, I had to agree. I think that Colorado fans have been accustomed to disappointment. It seems like we had that really great 2016 season, but just after that, we kind of fell into mediocrity, and people thought Mel Tucker was going to be the person to kind of push us out of that and get us back up into the competitor status in the Pac-12. But as we saw last year, I really thought last year, while it was a disappointment, it was an improvement. But he left, and just the whole level of trust we had in this football program kind of went down the drain. So this year, like you said, I'd love to see more than 2 wins. I think this team is capable of more than 2 wins. Like you said, UCLA coming up, a week 1 win is always good. It just kind of sets the tone for how the rest of the season is really going to go. And if you can get a win against not knocking UCLA, they're a talented team. They have one of the more talented QBs in the Pac-12. If you can beat him while at home, if you can beat that team, that really sets the standard for how the rest of the season is going to go, and just the expectations that they then put on themselves. Because if you come out and you lose week 1, it's just such a killer in terms of confidence, in terms of basically every aspect of that team. Then going into a road game week 2, it's just that much more of a killer. So while my expectations are low, like you said, I'd love to see more than 2 wins, but it's got to start week 1 with a win against UCLA.
So I agree, and I think that on top of the things that we've sort of mentioned thus far, I think that one of the things that Colorado still has moving in its sort of one of the things that Colorado still has working for it and working just sort of, and that I think we can continue to sort of leverage, is the fact that our recruiting's been really, really strong thus far. And despite, as you said, the lack of success that we've had, the recruiting still continued to be quite strong. It helps that, Laviska Shenault, star running back / wide receiver sort of player for the Buffs, had his brother Levante come in. I think that's a really bright prospect to have. Brendan Rice, son of Jerry Rice, Hall of Fame wide receiver, picking up him as well. Some high profile names like that is super, super important for the Buffs in order to build the kind of team that doesn't disappoint year in and year out, as you've been saying. And I think then also just hopefully we can build some consistency this year. And the fact that Carl Durrell has spent time coaching at CU in the past and has now returned to coach at CU and retained a decent amount of the staff that Mel Tucker brought on last year, I think that could be super, super beneficial for the Buffs in terms of just creating some consistency. Because as we talked about in the last show, part of the problem and part of the difficulty has been the lack of consistency from the coaching staff at the quarterback position, things like that, just sort of like on a year in, year out basis. And as a result, it's sort of left us every single year at the beginning of the year wondering kind of where we stand and what kind of personnel we're dealing with and things like that. And we haven't really had any coach be able to sort of put in the time to build a team that is going to work within a system that they want to implement and things like that. And instead, they're sort of left, like Carl Durrell, having to inherit the players that Mel Tucker recruited and then try to fit them into a system that he thinks will work. And so I think that it's important that we build a little bit of a level of of consistency, and we are starting to do that. So I would say, while my expectations are tempered, I am still optimistic.
Yeah, I think that's why like I've always wanted to push so hard for Brendan Lewis. It's just if you can start him at the freshman level and have him consistently be the starting QB for 3 years, it builds up his confidence, his skill level, his ability to play at a college level. Just because we talked about the difference between a high school level of football and a college level of football, and it provides this football program and this fan base someone they can kind of rally behind and really support throughout their football career at CU. And like you said, we just haven't had that. We haven't had a consistent starting quarterback. We haven't had a consistent coaching staff. Really the one real consistent we've had was Laviska Shenault the past 3 years. And, when he's gone, you got to start all over again. And that's why, like, this team is so promising, but I just think the coaches, like we've seen, are kind of missing their opportunities to really ingrain this level of consistency within this program. But obviously they know better than me and you. So, while we're just two people talking about Colorado football, and while we have some hopes and some dreams, we're not ultimately the ones making the decisions come game day.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps Carl Durrell and Darren Chiavarini's outlook with putting, with sort of making the decisions that they have been on the quarterback front is a matter of just sort of establishing a winning culture at CU, which is something that we've struggled with. And so, that sort of leads into our next point, is that we've got some big news for the Buffs, and that is that Sam Neuer has been named QB1, right? And we talked in the last show about the fact that they were still indecisive about the quarterback position. They kind of waited until this weekend in order to even make that decision. That's still only a week out from when the season's beginning. What are your sort of initial thoughts on the choice of Neuer, especially sort of given the circumstances and things like that?
The people know our feelings. I feel like we're in agreement that this should have been Brendan Lewis's job to begin with. But then again, I understand why they went with a guy like Neuer. The experience on this football team, he is a fifth year. While he hasn't been a quarterback for all those 5 years, he was recruited to Colorado to be a quarterback. So it's not like he's this new guy who they decided to pluck from the safety position and make him into a quarterback. He knows the position. And ultimately they saw something in him that they didn't see in Lionel or in Lewis. Ultimately they felt that he was their best chance at going out there, being the playmaker and producing on the field for Colorado. What I don't like about it is how long they waited. Yeah, sure. You waited. You kind of waited to the last minute. You waited a week before the first game of the season, and it's a little disheartening as a Colorado fan, thinking like, why didn't we have this decision like 3 weeks earlier? Why couldn't this guy get the reps with the first team for the 3 weeks leading up to the first game and not the week leading up to the first game? But while I have my own personal opinions on who they should have gone with quarterback, I trust that Colorado and Coach Chiavarini know what they're doing, and feel confident that Neuer's going to go out and win them football games.
I agree. I agree with the frustrated sentiment. I think in terms of given that this is the option that we're given, right? This is the circumstance we're given. Is I think the reasons to be optimistic about Sam Neuer is the fact that, like you said, he's in his fifth year on the CU football team. He's been part of this program through this is his fourth coach now in 5 years. Do I have that right? Or third coach in 5 years. Sorry. And his third coach in 5 years, but he's like, as we talk about consistently, he's been a consistent, sort of just figurehead, if you will, within the CU Buffs program for all that time. He was a backup to Stefo Lufau. Then he was a backup to Steven Montez for the first, for Montez's first year. Montez's second year. Last year, he obviously moved around a little bit under Coach Tucker and played on the defensive side of the ball. And now sort of he's back behind center. But at least for the players who are on the CU Buffs team that have been here for more than a year or two, Sam Neuer is a person who has the age that you can't teach maturity, right? That maturity just comes. And he has been part of the CU Buffs for several years now. And so I think that is something to be optimistic about. And while it doesn't mean that he's going to necessarily be with the Buffs long term, because obviously this is his last year of eligibility and things like that, I think that at the very least, again, in terms of establishing sort of a winning culture at CU and taking this sort of wonky year to try to make some big leaps and bounds in terms of the respect from the Buffs, I think that having somebody who's been around the program for as long as Sam Neuer has, and even playing scout quarterback, he still, a scout quarterback still a leadership position on the team, especially with guys who perhaps were on scout offense back 3 years ago and have now perhaps worked their way into the starting offensive lineup. And so I think to have that level of consistency and to be able to have players be able to look up to somebody who is 3-4 years older than them and sort of have him be the leadership focus for this team, I think is something to be optimistic about.
Yeah, you said it. It's really about setting up this winning culture at CU that we haven't been accustomed to really since like the golden ages of Colorado football back in the 90s. I mean, theoretically, when you think about it, like the 2016 season was really a blip in the past 20 years of this football program's history. That roster was stacked. Cepho and Philip Lindsay, who's turned out to be this great running back in the NFL. But besides that year, I wouldn't say it's been a losing culture. It's just been stuck in mediocrity. And people bought into Mel Tucker last year, and then he jumped ship to Michigan State. And I think now, like you said, that Neuer's been a guy who's stuck with them for 5 years, who has been flexible enough to play to switch positions than what he was recruited for and play where he needs to play in order for this team to win a football game. And he obviously is committed enough to this team that he's going to stay all 5 years. And he very well could have transferred. He thought about transferring, but Coach Durrell and Coach Cheverini made a commitment to him that he would have an opportunity to win this starting spot when Montez left. And obviously he proved to them that he was good enough to be the starting quarterback for this Colorado team. I said this when I said before you talked. Obviously, Durrell and Cheverini saw something in Neuer that is going to win us football games. And the nice thing about football is if he goes out there against UCLA and just doesn't have a good game, we have Tyler Lytle, and hopefully we see Brendan Lewis in some facet at the quarterback position just to see his potential at the quarterback at quarterback. But from here on out, I have my full support for Neuer, for Durrell, for Cheverini. For the time being, I'm all in.
I agree, and I mean it's a little bit of sort of a an extra benefit for us as here at Dash Sports and stuff to be able to be still having our starting quarterback be from Beaverton, Oregon, stuff like that. I know that Beaver Dash is going to be bummed about that. That they let the hometown boy slip, but we get to keep him. And as you were saying with that 2016 season sort of being a little bit of a blip in the in the last 15 years or so of 15, 20 years of CU football, is that Sam Neuer was on that team, right? And so while he was third string, at least sort of in that capacity behind both Cepho Lufau and Stephen Montez, it's kind of the fact that he was part of sort of like the rise and all of that sort of like seeming like they were gonna, kind of really get over that hump finally and start building a program that was looking to sort of revive the great, like the golden, as you said, the golden days, and sort of bring that culture back to Boulder. I think that's nothing but a positive. Even if he, because even if he was a third string, he still witnessed what that is like, and what what reaching that sort of level of play, being in the Pac-12 championship is all about. And it's we shouldn't we shouldn't overlook as well the fact that he's a 6'4", 220-pound athlete. Like that, he's a big guy. He has the capacity to sling it in the pocket because the dude he's got the height, he's got the length, but at the same time he's a big dude who can still potentially get out of the pocket, run the ball, use his legs. And so I'm interested to see how much of that we see from Sam Neuer, how much of a pocket passer he is versus local quarterback, because the only instances when we've really seen him have been in the very end of games when CU's been in some massive lead against, say, CSU or something like that, and he comes in for like a play or two at the end of the game, spikes the ball, and that's it. So so I'm excited to see all of that from Sam Neuer, and I think that the age and the experience and the maturity can only be positives for the Buffs, and perhaps that could signal potential for a turning point in what it means to be a part of CU football and creating a winning culture in Boulder.
Yeah. Only time will tell. We'll have to see when Saturday comes around. But that being said, outside of the Pac-12, what a wild college football season it has been so far. We have no undefeated Big 12 teams, which really sets up the opportunity for a Pac-12 team to possibly slip into that college football playoff. But if it was me, I still don't think the Pac-12 has that edge. But what do you think?
I think that. So I agree. It's been a crazy football season. I think that the lack of fans or the reduced fans in a lot of the different, not a lot of the different conferences, certainly in the Big 12, not quite as much in the ACC and the SEC. There's still been some fans, but the fan impact is not quite the same as it normally is because they're not at capacity. You're not filling a 75, 100,000 person stadium to capacity. So I think that that's definitely leveled the playing field in certain ways, and it's sort of changed the way that these sort of home and away games are played, and the dynamic between teams, and so I think that has obviously set up a really sort of packed, like basically just teams' records and stuff are looking very, very similar because a lot of these sort of external factors have been taken out of the equation to some extent, and has sort of separated the men from the boys a little bit, as we see in the SEC, where Bama's the only undefeated team left, which we could have, anybody could have predicted. Nick Saban's Alabama teams are always some of the most disciplined, like most talented teams in the country, and regardless of whether they have fans in their stadium or not, they're still going to be blowing out teams by the amount that they do. But I think that the fact that there's no undefeated teams in the Big 12, I think that the fact that Northwestern is one of the undefeated teams in the Big 10, along with, we've got powerhouses like Ohio State, and then we've also got Purdue and Northwestern and Indiana, all tied atop the at the top of the Big 10 at 2-0. Like that opens up that opens the door wide open. And I mean, I expect to see Ohio State to continue to win games. Ohio State's got an immensely talented team, but I think the fact that the Big 12 already has no undefeated teams, and the fact that USC is ranked number 20 going into the polls this weekend, and we haven't even started playing football yet, gives the Pac-12 some hope. I think that we could potentially then see an SEC, ACC, Big Ten, Pac-12 sort of college football playoff.
Yeah.
I think that's within the realm of possibilities, or seeing maybe like two SEC teams or two ACC teams, because right now we've got both Clemson and Notre Dame undefeated. So if Clemson and Notre Dame continue to have the seasons that they're having, and and they are as successful as they are, then potentially we see two ACC teams, a Big Ten team, and a Pac-12 team. I think that if USC or like if a USC or an Arizona State, or by some crazy circumstance, the Buffs are an undefeated Pac-12 team come the end of these 7 weeks, then I think it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities to consider the Pac-12 as a strong candidate for a spot in the college football playoff.
Yeah. So really quickly, some numbers for you. Ohio State and Alabama both have like a 57% chance of making it. Clemson goes down by 20% at 35%, and then the two Pac-12 teams, according to FPI, are Oregon at 5% and USC at 4%. Really, when it comes down to it, if the Pac-12 wants any chance, a team's got to go undefeated. Just because, like the argument between a one-loss SEC team and a one-loss USC team, they're going to go with the one-loss SEC team all day, just because of the talent and the competition and all that kind of stuff. They're just going to make the argument that the Pac-12 is not as competitive. They didn't play as tough games as a team, that kind of thing. But I think, like you said, like down the road, if we're only seeing like a Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame, those only are the undefeated teams. Because Notre Dame is now part of the ACC, I believe they have to play Clemson. I'm not quite sure, but that could set up a possibility for now a one-loss ACC team. There's your chance for a Pac-12 team to slip in. What I'd really like to see, though, is a non-Power 5 team to slip in there. Someone like Cincinnati. They're 5-0, ranked 6th in the nation. Well, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it would really diversify the college football playoff, just because it's been so Power 5 heavy, within good reason. The past couple of years they've been all undefeated teams, and they've been the best in the nation, and that's not the argument. But I think if Cincinnati can prove itself as an undefeated team, this kind of goes back to the argument UCF had a couple of years ago. Like, why weren't they included? They went undefeated. They had a perfect season. They played tough opponents, but yet they were left out. So I think the fact that the Big 12 is not undefeated, Alabama is the only undefeated one in the SEC, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, I think it sets up the opportunity for a lot of different scenarios to happen. I would like for them not to go the traditional route of picking a one-loss SEC, Big 10, Big 12 team. I think you could do an undefeated Pac-12 or an undefeated non-Power 5 team like Cincinnati, but we're gonna have to see what happens.
I agree. So I agree exactly with what you just said right now, which is that picking a one-loss SEC or ACC team I think it's wrong, more so this year than any year, because as we were just talking about, with the fact that the Big 12 already doesn't have any undefeated teams, right? And that's a Power 5 conference. That it goes to show how much of an equalizer COVID sort of become in sort of the college football realm as far as competitiveness goes. And I think that in order for a team to be able to make the college football playoff or to get to the college football playoff and still be undefeated, right? Like in order for them to get to the end of the season and still be undefeated, the fact that there's no undefeated teams in the Big 12 already is a testament to how difficult that is this year, given how much of an equalizer and how much COVID sort of just thrown an absolute wrench into the way that teams train and the way that teams travel and the way that teams, they have to remain isolated and things like that. And it's just, I mean, I think it's a feather. It would be a feather, an absolute feather in a team like Cincinnati's cap to to go undefeated all the way, and that they would deserve to be rewarded with that kind of, with like in that sort of way. And I think that I would not be surprised if we don't see a team in the Big Ten or a team in the Pac-12 or both. I would not be surprised if we see both of those conferences end up like the Big 12 with no undefeated teams in them come week 3 or week 4 already. You know what I mean? Like I just think I just think that given the teams that are left undefeated in the Big Ten right now, I think that the only team that has potential to go all the way undefeated is Ohio State. And like we've seen, that it's sort of, anyone, like, who knows what could happen. Justin Fields could get coronavirus, and then that could throw an absolute wrench into, Ohio State's planning of things. So I think anything's possible.
Yeah, anything's possible. You saw what happened with Clemson last week with no Trevor Lawrence. That was a much closer game than Clemson would have hoped.
Absolutely.
But we're going to have to see. Obviously, you have to wait and see if any Pac-12 team goes undefeated. Hopefully that happens, and hopefully we finally get representation since the last team was Washington way back when in Oregon. But it would be nice. With that, we're going to end the show right here. Thank you guys so much for coming to another episode of Buffalo Dash. If you want to see more of us, follow us on social media, like always, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Check out our website, dashboards.tv. Check out our YouTube channel at dashboards.tv. Check out Sports Pac 12, super cool partnership. Some of us are writing articles for it. They retweet our stuff, we retweet their stuff. Great little business partnership we got going there. But with that, next week we'll finally have a game to talk about, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty to talk about with that. But we'll see you all next time.